PhillyStartupLeaders.org presents the 2010 Founder Factory Conference, recorded November 17, 2010 at the World Cafe Live in Philadelphia. Brought to you by Morgan Lewis, providing comprehensive transactional, litigation, labor and employment, and intellectual property legal services to clients of all sizes, from global Fortune 100 companies to just-conceived startups across all major industries. On the web at morganlewis.com. And by CHARIOT Solutions, an IT consulting firm specializing in application development and systems integration using Java and open source technologies. On the web at chariotsolutions.com. And by Cone Partners, an independent insurance brokerage that delivers integrated solutions to meet client needs in business, benefits, life, and personal insurance. Also by Monetate, the leading independent provider of testing, targeting, and personalization for websites. On the web at monetate.com. And by Leadnomics, an industry leader in lead generation and performance marketing. On the web at leadnomics.com. In this episode, Fishbowl number 3, Alternative Funding, with representatives from AchieveNext and Bashpole.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Chris Sierra. I'm the CTO of ViewsIt.
And my name is Joel Caparella with Inflection Methods.
The next topic is alternative funding. So this is sources other than venture capital, angels, and commercial lenders and banks. So this includes bootstrapping, government funding, and also one revenue stream that funds another revenue stream within your business. And we're going to introduce the first company, which is AchieveNext.
Nick Araka is going to be introduced in a second. I think you're going to enjoy listening to Nick's story. But let me tell you a little bit about AchieveNext. So CFOs, accountants, financial professionals, CPAs, where might they kind of congregate to kind of share, learn from one another, gain and exchange resources? Well, AchieveNext is one of those places that they're doing it. What's interesting is the multiple ways in which they're gathering. So I had the opportunity to talk to Nick early today, and was unaware of this, but they're actually meeting physically, so a lot all over the country, gatherings of these financial professionals sharing, exchanging ideas, but then ongoing into the online world as well. So I'll let Nick explain it when he gets up here, but I think as far as the top is concerned, is the funding model that they chose is rather unique. I think you'd all agree, and it presents some unique challenges. So I'd challenge the Fishbowl panel to kind of, probe into that a little bit, because while it certainly got AchieveNext up and running, there's certainly some challenges that may lay ahead. So enjoy that, and going to give it back to Chris to talk about Bashpole.
The other company is Ben Ashpole's company, affectionately named Bashpole. And this is a Philly startup that has taken two types of alternative funding, which you're going to learn about. They have two products. One is called Updenity, which is focused on contact management. The other is called Mashulator, which is a database integration and data recommendation company, or product. So with that, Gil's going to get started with the program.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce the panelists for the alternative funding Fishbowl. So Mark Zawell, co-founder and CEO of Equal App. We saw him earlier today. Anthony Gold, CEO of Healthy Humans. Again, another Fishbowl alumni. Sam Whitaker, founder and CEO of Green Fire. And Hal Reel, founder and president of World Cafe Live. So just to introduce our Fishbowlies, are they fish? We call them fish. So Nick Araka is the co-founder and CEO of CFO Alliance and AchieveNext. He's considered one of the nation's most prominent business, career, and life connectors for accounting and finance professionals. Just prior, Nick served in a leadership role for a national accounting firm. Prior to that, Nick established and led a human capital firm. Nick began his career as a practicing attorney and has served on the selection committee of PACT and Early Stage East conferences. So Nick, come on up. And then we have Ben Ashpole, is the CEO of Bashpole. Ben has experience with two forms of alternative funding, putting together a small team that performed part-time consulting while working on a software project, and pursuing state and federal grants with DARPA, Ben's target customer while working for Lockheed Martin. Since launching Bashpole, Ben has won 3 small business innovative research contracts from DARPA, enabling him and a few employees to focus on software development without the need to do outside funding. So with that, Ben, please join us. And maybe we can have, Ben, you can start by taking the mic and talking a little bit about sort of your, on the panel. And we have a surprise guest, so Nat Turner. So Nat will be joining us on the panel as well, who is the founder and CEO of a company that I love, which is Invite Media, which is now a Google company. And so we'll be hearing about that a little bit later. But for now, we'll have Nat join us on the panel. So Ben, take it away, and would love to hear more about your experiences with alternate funding.
All right, thank you very much. I'll get to it, but I'd say one of the keys to government funding is preparation, and for me that meant I actually made slides. Sorry to be so formal. Please forgive me. I was thinking throughout the course of today that the difference between a startup company and a small business is that a startup has nothing, and that's a big part of where I got my start. And my background, in fact, was, I would say, thoroughly ill-suited for doing a startup at that, in that I'm not actually from Philadelphia originally. I grew up in a very small town in the Midwest where the mindset was overwhelmingly conventional, do everything the conventional way all the time. And I personally went to college and then decided I needed to work for big corporate in order to learn how companies work, because I ultimately wanted to have a startup. This was completely wrong. And I would say the story for me really was of a lot of things that didn't work, but the idea that no matter what, I wasn't going to stop ever. And I didn't have friends and family money as far as, how do you get this going? A lot of companies, I would say, are lucky in that a lot of what you hear advice about is really after the company's already got some kind of start, how do you spend your time and how do you spend your money? Well, what if you don't have any of that to begin with? That's what funding's about. I didn't have any angel connections. I didn't have a mortgage that would work for me. I had spent pretty much everything I had after leaving big corporate and going back to grad school as a full-time PhD student, sort of realizing that the ivory tower was also not a good place to learn about how to start a company. And so what little money I had, I spent completely on it and realized that I had to do something else. And so I started doing web development, which is a really rough business when you don't yet have any customer connections either. So I needed something different. I needed a way that I could grow a company. What I found was that in trying to do consulting, I cared way too much about my customers and doing a nice job for them, which left no time for product development of my own, and that was the whole point and goal of it all along. But it did give me some experience, and it did give me the foundation of a team, which I didn't know how to build at the time, and eventually I had to get rid of all but one of the team members. I had to get rid of advisors because I learned that if you have advisors that aren't from your field, just because they know something about business doesn't mean they have any idea how to help you and your business. And I had to find a way to get through to the one connection that I had built up, and that was still a redeeming thing that would make it all possible. And that was what you call small business innovative research. This is a contract from the federal government that's a set-aside. It turns out that the military, in my case, doesn't build a lot of stuff themselves. If they can, they buy it from contractors. And I had, fortunately, this one bit of good experience from my otherwise office space existence in big corporate that let me know that if I had a compelling idea and I had a compelling connection and I could wait long enough, and I think those are questions you guys should ask me about, because it was a long wait. There's actually a lot of money that has major advantages available. It's not just the Defense Department that has these kinds of contracts. There's NIH, and there's several other agencies that you can look toward. I could speak the most about DoD because that's where I've got lots of experience from my previous job, from my advisor in grad school, and from winning contracts myself. And I could also speak to the criteria about them being new, being something that solves a problem they care about, but amazingly, being something that they want you to go forth and commercialize. They want to see that a company can be successful. And there's good reason for it. It's a political system where their success in part comes from your success. The other source of funding that I found was that state governments have a lot of incentives right now, especially since the recession. And in some ways, it's almost gotten better for me as a startup in a recession, simply because there's a lot of motivation to make things better. I have found that there is a support structure in Pennsylvania through Ben Franklin Technology Partners, which is a competitive system to get effectively a loan. And the drawback to that is that it's a loan and you have to pay it back. And the benefit is that they have a really amazing review process. I'm fortunate to now be advised by some people that are involved with that, and that's really helped me out. I also found that in my home state of Indiana, they have a major brain drain problem, and the way that they've decided to solve that is to offer matching funds to SBIRs. So for any of the Phase 1 dollars that I get, up to $75,000, they'll give me a matching grant. No strings attached other than that I have an office in their state and I maintain some staff there. That's fantastic. They have no oversight. I don't give them any reports differently than what I give the government anyway. And I get to keep all of my company because I'm helping create jobs in that area. And that's not the only place where that still is, but I decided I want to do it in part for this reason, and in part because it gives me an excuse to be closer to my old family and friends. So, as I alluded, the main advantage is that I get to keep the equity. I get to develop a product. Unlike doing a consulting gig, I'm not developing something for somebody else that they then own. I get to control the company, and the payback terms are pretty good because I don't have to pay anybody back. Not yet, anyway. And with that, I think I should open it up for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. So question for you is, if you don't have the rich uncle or what have you, what are some ways that through customers and relationships like partners and such like that you can get these alternate funding?
So there are two parts to that. That's a fantastic question. When I was doing the consulting, I had to really rely on going out and networking and just making friends with people that would want business from us. And my first set of staff, I had to gain them largely on personality, or I would set up unpaid internships, which basically meant they were going to learn along with us. And it was a matter of getting the ball rolling from a very slow start. But I would say even to a greater extent, at the government level, relationships are the real key difference. So if you take somebody like the Defense Department, specifically Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, they have what are called program managers in charge of many millions of dollars of funding every year that they have to give out in order to keep our government and our military on the cutting edge. This is what they call high-risk, high-reward projects. They want something that's cutting edge, but if it pays off, great, it'll pay off big, and if it doesn't, they took the risk, it was worth it. The Soviets aren't going to beat us to the moon. The relationship building there that I had started from many, many years ago, and so the point of that was that they have lots and lots of people approaching them all the time with crazy ideas, looking for money that isn't going to cost them any equity. And so how do they sort out the legit ones from the actually crazy ones? And so I would say the first step there is to plan to spend a lot of time understanding what it is that the guys down there are actually looking for, then help create the program and be a part of the process. So if anybody goes and Googles SBIR right now, you'll find lots of solicitations. But every one of those was developed in tandem with certain people already in industry to make sure that the idea is doable, because again, it's got to be a little bit far-fetched, and that they know who it is that's a reputable person in that area.
So one of the advantages, I think, of raising money via an angel or venture group is the expertise or the strategic guidance that those individuals then put toward your startup. And so if you're raising capital via, an SBIR, are you receiving any type of guidance? And if not, who are you turning to provide you that strategic support?
In a way, I'm lucky right now because the climate at DARPA is very strongly in favor of commercializing products. What's happened in a lot of years, and let me come back to answer that directly, is that a lot of technologies were developed and never commercialized. And this is one of the criticisms of companies that receive SBIR funding. How do they actually get out there and those connections? And the problem is that even the military doesn't like to buy stuff unless somebody else has bought it first. And finally they're catching on to this, that no, the right way to do an SBIR is to have a company that wants to commercialize first and then retrofit for military instead of the other way around. So that's what I'm doing. And I don't have that commercial support coming from the funding agency itself, so I've looked for it in the form of some really excellent advisors that I have here, been there, done that type of guys that are providing the kinds of connections that are going to lead to the commercialization, and with any luck, ultimately more government funding.
Just one quick follow-up. Are those advisors getting any equity in your business for that type of guidance or support?
No. Right now, no. I have an arrangement with an advisor who is earning a small stake of what's raised through these funds and presumably gets a better job as the company is able. And I actually made this mistake in the past with previous advisors that they took an equity stake and they assumed they were going to get a certain amount of money, but then the product I was developing at the time imploded. It completely fell apart. They were the wrong guys. And so that's not a part of the deal right now. It may be going forward that I'll create strategic alliances where equity is involved, but so far it hasn't happened.
So Ben, you had mentioned a couple times that you had to fire your initial advisors. Would you recommend for folks looking for SBIR and other types of DARPA types of events that they bring on advisors that are related to or have connections in the government space and can help smooth that path?
Yeah.
So any tips you'd have for finding those kinds of folks?
Yeah, definitely. Ask me. I know a bunch of guys, and I'd be happy to recommend them. Second, make sure that they've done it before. They may think that they've written grants for state government or a dozen other things, but I guarantee you it won't help because even the requirements that are written online about how you're supposed to submit your proposals are wrong. It's not really what they're looking for. And, there are two sides of those advisors. There's the technical content advisor who should have those connections and understand the people that are down there. And there's the format type advisor. There are a few people out there that actually are full-time coaches of SBIRs, and they know all those intricacies of making sure every line of the budget is right, the formatting is right, the confidential is in the right place and not the wrong place, or any of that is grounds to get rejected right away.
One follow-up, if I could, actually a plug. You had mentioned that Ben Franklin is great because of the due diligence that they do, which I agree is phenomenal. But I also think one of the underrated things or things that most people aren't aware of is how good the board support that Ben Franklin provides after they grant that money, or the loan as you call it. that the support is actually phenomenal. And I know Healthy Humans in particular has benefited tremendously from the board advisors that we've had, and I'm sure many other companies have. So just a plug for Ben Franklin on the value, not just on the due diligence, but on the execution.
And I'll second that, in fact. I'm still considering working with them for that very reason. One of the things my company is doing right now is actively seeking the right board of advisors and directors. I think that's the next step for us.
I guess, could you talk a little bit about how much effort and time is associated with acquiring an SBIR grant, and then also during that process, as you went through it, were you also kind of in parallel trying to find angels or VCs, or more, I guess you could call it traditional? And if not, how would you have funded your company if you hadn't gotten the SBIR grant?
Let me start with the first part of that question. Yeah, in tandem I was at the time, but I had an idea, and we had a recession, and the climate wasn't very receptive to angel investment in an idea as opposed to a product. So very much the problem was, how do you create something from nothing? And the only way I could do that that I could figure out at the time was through consulting work. So I had at least something, I had some guys, and even if it was only one day a week that they were contributing to the code base to the next thing, it meant that I could say that I've got a next thing that I'm working on, which then lent credibility to my SBIR application.
So I think we're going down the line here. So a question is, generally with alternative funding, you have alternative terms from what we've seen.
Yeah.
So you spoke to this a little bit. Have you seen any strings attached terms that you encountered in these alternative funding approaches that you think may hamper your business in the future?
I don't know if they're going to hamper the business, in fact. So in the case of the state funding from Indiana, I had to move half of my core employees by revenue, or by wages, I mean, to Indiana. Since we only have a few people in the company, and I didn't mind changing my driver's license back, this was not such a big deal. Now, going forward, the challenge is on me to take advantages of what that geography has to offer, like cheap land and cheap labor that's relatively well-trained, and there's a lot of people out there that have lost jobs recently that we can set up for that. And on the federal government side, the reporting requirements are really not that bad. I submit a report each month summarizing our progress, and you know, the bulk of the work was really in the application, the buildup of the relationship with the program manager, getting them to understand exactly what we were going to do. In the Phase 1 SBIR, there's 25 pages of technical content that you need to write. And there's definitely a method to the madness if you've never written such a long document before. And there are a set of questions that they expect everybody to answer, but they don't ever say that you need to know. And then there's another 10 pages or so of supporting documentation, budget, cover pages, and all that kind of hoopla. But that's what the coaches will help you with. And there are a few of these guys out there that just really know their stuff about that.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben. Nick?
Well, I'm Nick Aracco, CEO and co-founder of a company called AchieveNext and the CFO Alliance. As somebody who produces 60-plus collaborative type of executive knowledge sharing, recommendation sharing exchanges that center around key issues keeping you up at night, I can tell you what my key issue is, and through our story. So what happens when you are 10-plus years into your career, you and a business colleague have prominent, visible leadership roles in a $1.5 billion company, and one day you come up with an idea on a business that they're not in the business of, but could be beneficial to them if incubated, developed, and launched. So my co-founder and I found ourselves in that position a couple of years ago, and centered around one key issue or need. We were and are spending our time with chief financial officers, and anybody here in the room who's part of a startup or even a later stage or established company has a financial function. The role of the CFO continues to increase in scope, visibility, and responsibility. And here was an audience whose increased demand and need for a professional peer network, professional development platform, and resources was sitting right in front of us with no business model, organization, or platform in place to address it. And we thought if we could develop a platform that would bring these CFOs together, help them create this type of network, centered around facilitating and fueling them to debate, discuss, and dissect the critical issues that keep them up at night, we could not only help address that key issue and that satisfy that demand, but imagine that that audience is your customer audience or your client audience. And instead of push marketing and branding as a way to get you and your services or product in front of them, imagine replacing that with an opportunity to help fuel, facilitate, hear about, and add to discussions around the problems they face and layer in the answers with your solutions in a way that's not viewed as a thinly veiled attempt at selling services or a purely theoretical think tank-like type of model. So our first step was scratch our heads and say, what do we do with this? There was nothing really else out there that took this live type of component and development of an online community that would center around making these types of recommendations, filtering out all of the unwanted requests to connect and activity that sits out there today that I call information overload. We thought, how does this impact what we're doing day to day? We certainly love our role and what we're doing, and hell, we have some gray hair and some families to feed. So what do we do about this? Well, we actually wrote 2 business plans. And I don't know if my co-founders here remember that. One was kind of, okay, we're seeding and funding this, and here's our big vision for what we want to do with this short-term and long-term. While writing that plan, we wrote a second plan called, if I was going to ask my employer today what I want and what we're going to do and what I need to make this happen, and most importantly, what's in it for you to give me that? Let's see what happens. So that was a very painful exercise. I remember our wives and kids on Saturdays and Sundays and at nights were like, what are you two doing? You know, like what's going to come out of this? And there were these kind of, it was an amazing exercise because we saw correlation and opportunity, and putting the 2 together developed one. And we said to this employer, our corporate partner, you know us, you know what we're capable of. Here's what this is all about, and here's what's in it for you. And it was that, I would say, loosely defined, which we'll get to as it relates to issues as to investment and scale. And they said, you talk with passion and vision. It sounds like you're going to go downstairs and do this regardless of whether or not we say we want to get behind this. And it also, you made it perfectly clear, we're not in the business of building these types of communities. You are, but we see the correlation. So we understand why this has to be completely separate and a separate company owned by you. So we said, okay, we'll show you how serious we are. We'll put our own checks into the game. We'll start this up, and we'll test it out. And in testing it out, they provided us with not only significant financial support in the form of sponsorship revenue, not equity position, and not debt to a certain point. And they also provided us all of our infrastructure for me to be able to, with my partner, invest in this business and test a pilot. No script, no structure, no written agreement around those checks and the investment. But what we did was develop the ROI formula and began to feed that to them. 2 years later, where are we? We have a team of 8 professionals. We are live with the live component in 9 cities, heading into 25, our next 4 in include Dallas, Denver, Irvine, California, and Chicago, sorry. And we're live in Boston, down in Miami, and in Phoenix right now, producing live discussions for about 1,700 CFOs and developing an online community where we fuel and facilitate additional dialogue and activity for the community and its partners. Where McGladrey is to date, we had an opportunity to go through the same process with Ben Franklin, and it was an amazing exercise, not only for us to be sharing the story today about kind of how we got to where we are, but to tighten up the ship and ask key questions of that key corporate sponsor partner. Because the team at Ben Franklin had the same questions. They said, we see where you got to. We see your vision to scale. It's amazing you got them to take you that far. How far are they willing to go from here? And when we posed that question, we realized, you know what? With structure and boundary, ex-litigator here, comes terms and conditions you need to understand, potentially negotiate, and live by. But at the same time, with structure comes clarity. Clarity came focus, and focus came investment in execution. So.
Great, thank you very much. So, panelists, I'll open up for some questions. You don't have to do it in order, but okay.
I was just going to ask, what relationship do you have with that company now, and I guess I'm having a hard time understanding kind of what their incentives were in terms of making that strategic investment without any kind of really set terms and.
Well, part of it is reinventing the B2B business development, branding, and marketing experience for that industry. My recipe and formula through individual performance as somebody who drove new revenue and growth for them didn't have a recipe and formula beyond getting this buying audience, these CFOs, talking to me about the issues keeping them up at night and playing qualified connector to them to the solutions that are offered. Many times they have nothing to do with my role at that company, but they trusted and validated me, so when the need arose, it never went out. It came directly to. And the question became, well, if we invest in this platform and we develop our own success model, won't we be able to institutionalize and scale that same formula, demonstrate to this audience that we have thought leadership, we have their advocacy in mind, and we're here when they need us, but more importantly, when they need others, we can help point them in the right direction.
I assume that the partner company is not a public company?
They're not.
So
actually, they are owned by a public company, so yes, they are public.
Okay. So the question I would have is, most public companies would have, pretty strict rules about allowing this type of a spin out or entrepreneurial types of things going on. And so the question I have for you is for the audience. Can you share some advice you'd give to folks who are in big public companies who have a great idea where it could be synergistic for the companies they're in? What would you suggest their path forward to raising that without fear of being fired or whatever the case might be?
I have to point to the fact that I have a business partner who's a 180 of me. I'm like transparent Italian. I tell you more, you probably all walk out of here with my IP. I'd be like, oh, where'd that go? I have a business partner who, before I opened my mouth and before I put down on paper and before I communicated what this was all about, said, put yourself in their shoes. And I think we were in a unique position because we very clearly stated and articulated to them that this is not a business you're in. And it's not a business really anybody's in right now, per se. So that may have been our advantage. But I think by partnering and or having that communication dialogue, not only up here, but with somebody who's wired a bit differently helps.
I guess, could you help me understand why you didn't just kind of start this company on your own and then have your ex-employer as your first client?
I'm extremely impatient, and I saw an ability to scale quickly and effectively because we are an aggregator type model, bringing best in class of potential thought leaders like academia. I have 10 academic partners, and industry and media partners. I thought if I could bring this group together, play to their pain and their need to access this audience, we could do this more quickly and effectively. At the same time, I had already adopted the possessive pronoun for my employer. it was very much a we, and that, I don't underestimate that I could help solve their major problem while helping build my dream.
And then, you might have already answered this, and I'm just not getting it, but what exactly is in it for the employer? And
so we are, through the activity and access to McGladrey, generating direct new customer and enhanced customer relationships through this whole effort and initiative. Any other?
So what do you think you had to sacrifice through this process here, or what were some of the surprises that came out of the woodwork that you hadn't anticipated by having this sort of interesting relationship?
Two things. It's a recruitment issue for talent. They say, you don't look like a traditional startup, yet you're not owned by a $1.5 billion company. Okay, so it's an issue. It's a story I always feel like I have to tell. Second, I don't have responsibility for reporting performance and making decisions for outside investors. But what I do have is to make sure that I have a very successful founding sponsor partner, which at times pulls me and my team thin, and could at times create conflict on decision making about best interests of the company, best interests of the company short-term and long-term, and their interests as well.
So just to follow on these guys and frame it in a situation, if someone came to you and wanted to acquire your team and acquire your assets and acquire your content, how would that work? Is that possible? Do you
fully unencumbered? It is not it's an LLC owned by 3 principals, and
are you still on the payroll of this other company?
I am on retainer with them to assist them with market penetration and branding.
Great, good. We maybe have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience, if there are any.
The people that give you the guidance to do the paperwork for the military, for the department, the coaches that you had, do you have to pay for them?
Oh, the coaches, yes.
Yeah,
Typically that's the case. It'll be something like a $3,000 cash payment, maybe another $3,000 if they're successful, meaning if you get the contract. That's one guy that I worked with, and I learned enough from one interaction with him that I was able to do it again on my own the next 2 times. That was worth it, in short.
Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed this program from the Founder Factory. For more information, visit phillystartupleaders.org. We produce this program in the studios of Professional Podcasts in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. For everyone at the Philly Startup Leaders and Founder Factory, this is Steve Lubetkin. Thank you for joining us, and take good care.